whom he now replaces on the high court. You can see in those photos the strain this whole process has put on the justice and his family. Confirmation came today after a very narrow Senate vote and a even more contentious battle. Though there is also some celebration tonight. Republican Lindsey Graham declaring, quote, "I'm not tired of winning." Victory. President Trump telling reporters aboard Air Force One on his way to Kansas that Kavanaugh is an outstanding person who will be on the high court for many years to come. His second nominee to that court securing just barely enough votes for approval. Republicans believe the controversy has fired up their conservative base ahead of the midterms. As the president caps off a week of campaign-style rallies tonight. You can see it live, this time in Topeka. He'll be taking the stage in a little bit. A crowded arena there awaiting his arrival. We should get a glimpse of the president later this hour. We will go there live when that MAGA rally begins. Good evening, everyone. I'm Ed Henry in for John Scott, and this is the Fox Report. All of this coming after a confirmation battle that's literally rocked Washington and further divided the nation. It's also sparked an important conversation about sexual assault as Kavanaugh vehemently denied a series of allegations, leading to an FBI probe that did not corroborate the accusations and aggressive protests that are still going on at this hour in our nation's capital. Democrats fought hard to delay this nomination or defeat it altogether, but Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell pushed ahead with the votes, putting an end to months of bitter partisan wrangling.
There were times when I wondered whether we'd win, but I never considered for a moment quitting. That would have been unfair to Judge Kavanaugh. His reputation had been dragged through the mud for 2 weeks. He needed to have a vote. We needed to have a vote. The president and I had talked about, if we came up short, we were going to deal with another Supreme Court nominee this year.
Well, we've got live Fox team coverage this hour. John Roberts standing by with the reaction from the White House. Leland Vittert has the latest on those protests I mentioned at the Supreme Court. But first, let's start with our man on Capitol Hill, Mike Emanuel, who's been all over this story from the start. Good evening, Mike.
Ed, good evening to you. It's been a particularly nasty few weeks here on Capitol Hill, leading to this historic vote today. The scene was very serious on the Senate floor. You had 99 United States senators sitting at their respective desks for this historic Supreme Court vote. This was not the standard vote on the Senate floor with senators walking around giving a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Ahead of the vote, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell made this passionate appeal for the Senate to confirm this judge.
Judge Brett Kavanaugh is among the very best our nation has to offer. He will make the Senate and the country proud. He will serve with distinction on our highest court.
McConnell praised Maine Republican Susan Collins and Arizona Republican Jeff Flake, calling them heroic for insisting on the FBI review of the allegations against Judge Kavanaugh and then delivering critical votes. On the other side, Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer called on his base to step up.
Change must come from where change in America always begins, the ballot box. So to Americans, to so many millions who are outraged by what happened here, there's one answer: vote.
Montana Republican Steve Daines was not here. He was walking his daughter down the aisle today. His vote was paired with Alaska's Lisa Murkowski, the only Republican to oppose confirmation.
I believe that Judge Kavanaugh is a good man. He's a good man. He's clearly a learned judge. But in my conscience, because that's how I have to vote, the end of the day is with my conscience, I could not conclude that he is the right person for the court at this time.
Maryland Democrat Chris Van Hollen complained bitterly about the process.
The decision to plow right through will undermine and haunt the integrity of the Supreme Court for decades to come.
31 days out from the midterm elections, and this Supreme Court fight appears to have ignited both sides. Ed?
Mike, it's funny when you hear Democrats like Van Hollen talking about plowing through with the nomination, they seem to fail to mention that it was Harry Reid, a Democrat, as you know better than anyone, that opened the door to 51 votes, a simple majority, to get these nominations through. And the president obviously put the Supreme Court front and center in 2016. When you hear Chuck Schumer talk about get out there and vote, this is really going to be a big issue heading into the midterms.
Ed, no question about it. We've seen the protesters here on Capitol Hill both for and against the Judge Kavanaugh nomination. Republican leaders said they were worried about how they were going to get their base fired up to get out there and vote to support Republican candidates in the midterms. They say the Supreme Court fight has clearly done that. Democrats feel like it has fired up their side as well. We'll see if the turnout for both sides is better than your standard midterm election.
All right, Mike, thanks for reporting as always.
Thanks, Ed.
We mentioned the president's about to hold that big campaign rally in Topeka, Kansas, shortly after Brett Kavanaugh's swearing in. The president already expressing his strong support again for Kavanaugh before leaving Washington.
He will be a great justice of the Supreme Court. People have thought that for 10 years. They thought he's just an extraordinary person, a great talent, and I think he's going to make us all very proud.
Our chief correspondent, John Roberts, live at the White House. John, it seems like the president is so happy he can't stop talking. He spoke with you on the South Lawn. He tweeted. Then he spoke to reporters on Air Force One. Then on the tarmac he spoke. And as we mentioned, he's about to speak at this rally.
Yeah, there's no question about that. You got some noise going on behind me, Ed. It's a street band protesting what happened today. And they actually sound pretty good for a protest band. I got to give them that. Watch for the president to be on fire tonight at that rally. White House officials tell me that he's absolutely thrilled with the results of the confirmation vote this afternoon. On his way to Topeka, the president called Kavanaugh to congratulate him. The ceremonial White House swearing in of Kavanaugh, by the way, is going to happen on Monday evening. And as you mentioned, as he landed in Topeka, he stopped to talk to our pool camera for a few minutes. Listen to what he said.
So the vote is now in, and our country has a truly great new Supreme Court justice. We're very honored by it. He's an outstanding man, an outstanding person. What they put him and his family through, the Democrats, over the last few weeks is horrible.
Aboard Air Force One on the way to Topeka, the president sat with the pool as the vote came in. He was asked about his statement that there shouldn't even be a little bit of doubt whether the allegations against Kavanaugh were true. The president was asked, is he 100% certain that Christine Blasey Ford named the wrong person? Listen to his response.
100%, I have no doubt. And the FBI has done an excellent job. They went through it, and they went through it 7 times. If there were any problems, it would have happened over the last 25 or 30 years during his professional life. If any of that was even, if there was even a scintilla of something wrong.
Now, there was a real white-knuckle moment yesterday when Maine Senator Susan Collins took to the floor of the Senate to announce how she was going to vote. Earlier in the day, the White House had been called by Joe Manchin of West Virginia, who said, by the way, I'm going to vote yes. They assumed that Senator Collins, based on her vote on the cloture motion, would vote yes, but she didn't call the White House. They also thought, well, she wouldn't call probably unless she were a no. But everybody was on the edge of their seats right up until the moment that she said that she was going to vote for Kavanaugh. Earlier in the week, she had been very critical of what the president had said about Christine Blasey Ford at that rally in Mississippi. So I asked the president about all of that on his way to Marine One this afternoon. Listen here. You and Senator Collins have not always seen eye to eye. What do you think of what she said on the floor yesterday?
I thought that Susan was incredible yesterday. You could see how hard she worked, how hard she was working. She didn't stop. And I know for a fact, because I spoke with her, she didn't stop. And she gave an impassioned, beautiful speech yesterday, and that was from the heart.
High praise for Senator Collins, but just before the president came out on the South Lawn there to board Marine One, he had done a quick interview over the telephone with the Washington Post in which, Ed, he took aim at Alaska Senator Lisa Murkowski, telling the Post that she will likely never recover from her no vote against Kavanaugh, that Alaskans will never forgive her. But don't forget, it's 4 years until she's up for re-election, and a lot of things could be forgotten in that amount of time.
Yes, it could. But, John, you know better than anyone, there's a midterm election coming up in just about a month where others are on the ballot. You were ahead of the curve yesterday in reporting Joe Manchin was a likely yes. Is there a sense yet that maybe the president, who's been very active on the campaign trail, might pull back on West Virginia after getting that yes vote from Manchin and really focus on, say, North Dakota, where Heitkamp voted no, Indiana, where Donnelly voted no?
Well, you know, I talked yesterday to a couple of White House officials about this idea that, you know, I'd be willing to lay a bet that the president doesn't do any more campaign appearances in West Virginia between now and November the 6th. and all I heard down the other end of the line was a chuckle. So I don't know if there was any kind of a deal that was made with Manchin, but I think he's 9 points ahead, and the candidate that he's against isn't particularly strong. So I don't know that they're going to back off on Manchin, but I think you're right that Indiana, North Dakota will be, and Missouri as well, going to be a big focus of the president's campaign.
All right, John Roberts, thanks for sticking around late again on another very long week at the White House. Appreciate it. All right, and we mentioned a day of protests, high emotion on Capitol Hill. Brett Kavanaugh sworn in as Supreme Court Justice. Leland Vittert has been in the middle of it all these demonstrations. He joins me now live from outside the Supreme Court. Leland, I find it interesting that those photos we showed at the top of the broadcast, the swearing in of the new justice, that was happening obviously inside the court behind you while there were hundreds of people outside screaming, protesting, and the rest.
Exactly, Ed, and the people behind me are either the diehards who just haven't decided to go home, and the ones who haven't gotten arrested. We're actually at the back of the Supreme Court. This is one of the secure entrances and exits from the garage, and we've seen this group die down. But when a couple of the U.S. Marshals SUVs came out, conceivably with some of the justices, maybe with Brett Kavanaugh in it, we don't know which entrances they used, but people were throwing water on the SUVs, and it got pretty tense for a couple of minutes. We didn't see any arrests out here. Very different scene earlier in the day, both on the steps of the Supreme Court when protesters rushed up them, and then also on the steps of the U.S. Capitol. There was about 150 arrests, around 11 or 12, before the vote happened. After the vote, the Capitol Police had cleared the plaza in front of the Capitol, and after the vote, Vice President Pence, who had presided in the Senate, then walked out to a chorus of chants from the protesters. And that continued for a while. It might be difficult to tell from the video, but the vice president turned around, walked back inside the Senate, and then decided, you know what, I'm going to walk out anyway. Walked out, went down the stairs, and then into his motorcade to all of those chants. Since then, the crowd has continued to dwindle, and it's been a lot of people out here, pro-Kavanaugh, anti-Kavanaugh, tourists who just wanted to take a look at things. And we tried to talk to some who wanted to talk to us, some who didn't. Take a look.
Yeah, I think it will. If they think there's an injustice that went on, because they, you know.
But does that worry you as a Democrat, that the Republicans are going to be galvanized?
I'm not sure quite how worse it could get as it is now.
What message do you want to send?
Why didn't you come up to us like in a confrontation?
I didn't. I just walked up to you. Okay. So you don't think Republicans should be worried about a backlash?
No.
You think they should celebrate with cigars?
I think everyone should get a cigar and celebrate.
And the one thing that we continued to hear over and over and over, Ed, was as much as the crowd was sort of resigned to the fact on both sides that Brett Kavanaugh was going to be confirmed, they all talked about this as just the battle in the war leading up to November. And as the day went on, the speeches increasingly came about not only turning out the vote in November, but trying to turn these protesters into people who are going to go work the polls, canvass streets, et cetera, et cetera.
All right, Leland, appreciate your reporting tonight. The confirmation vote, as we noted, is finally over. Now Justice Kavanaugh preparing for his first day on the job at the Supreme Court next week. How will his presence on the court impact it? They're already in session. Joining us from Washington to help answer that question, Elizabeth Wydra. She's the president of the Constitutional Accountability Center. We appreciate you joining us tonight.
Great to be with you.
So, you know, it's interesting. I was live on the air last night when Lisa Murkowski was delivering her floor speech Friday evening about which way she would vote. We knew that she was planning to go no, but as we heard her mid-speech, we thought maybe she was saying yes, because at one point she said, I've come to believe that Judge Kavanaugh is more in line with her as a pro-choice Republican, and in her words, she doesn't think he would vote to overturn Roe v. Wade. And I was thinking maybe she's going to become a yes. She ended up voting present, of course. But my broader question is, a month ago, if a swing vote like that had felt he wasn't going to vote to overturn Roe, she would have been a yes before all of these sexual misconduct allegations. And it reminded me that we haven't talked about some of these big issues like abortion, same-sex marriage, all kinds of religious liberty. Instead, it's all been about sexual misconduct. What kind of a justice do you think he'll be?
Well, I think that's frankly a good point. You know, when President Trump nominated Brett Kavanaugh, it was after a campaign in which he repeatedly talked about how he wanted to mold a Supreme Court that would overturn Roe versus Wade, that would gut the Affordable Care Act, that would expand gun rights. And frankly, listening to Senator Collins' speech when she seemed to describe him as this centrist who would not do all of those things. Yeah. You know, I can't imagine that Trump and all of the other Republicans we're seeing celebrating tonight would be celebrating if he was going to be that kind of justice on the Supreme Court. Yeah. So I think a lot of those protesters that we're seeing engage with such passion are going to continue that momentum when we start to see rulings that do limit the right to abortion, that do perhaps start to strike at the core of the protections of the Affordable Care Act. And that's only going to energize the liberal side of the aisle even more. Yeah, and that gets right at my question, which is everyone's been shouting at one another and maybe hasn't been paying attention to both the 300 decisions, the opinions that he had written on the second highest court in the land, because they were talking about all the controversies in recent days, but they didn't listen closely to what Susan Collins said, and you just referred to it. Let's hear that, and I want to get your reaction on the other side. Here's what Collins said.
That Judge Kavanaugh is more of a centrist than some of his critics maintain is reflected in the fact that he and Chief Judge Merrick Garland voted the same way in 93% of the cases that they heard together. Indeed, Chief Judge Garland joined in more than 96% of the majority opinions authored by Judge Kavanaugh, dissenting only once.
Elizabeth, it feeds perfectly into your point, which is that, number one, she said the magic words Merrick Garland, the person that Democrats have wanted on the high court, and sort of makes Republicans say, whoa, wait a second. And she called him a centrist, as you noted a moment ago. So my broader question is, while there is celebration tonight at the White House, is this someone who might be less conservative on the court than conservatives think? I have absolutely no idea why Senator Collins thinks that. I've read Judge Kavanaugh's opinions from the D.C. Circuit, and even many of his conservative colleagues think that sometimes his opinions go too far. So I have no idea what she's talking about, other than maybe trying to save herself from feeling bad when she wakes up in the morning and looks in the mirror. But perhaps. He is not a centrist, for sure. Yeah, maybe try to explain her vote, you know, and say, look, he's not. She's trying to speak to the left and say he's not as conservative as you think, perhaps. And we'll see how his record plays out. Trump wouldn't have nominated him if he wasn't going to strike down Roe versus Wade. So you only have to listen to the president. Right. And he said that in the debate with Chris Wallace, that he expected he would nominate pro-life judges, as he has with both Neil Gorsuch and now Brett Kavanaugh. And he said then it would be overturned and will go back to the states. So what else are you looking for? For example, people haven't talked about the economy, government regulation. This is someone who on the Court of Appeals, then Judge Kavanaugh, was very aggressive, as the president has been, in trying to do away with government regulations that have helped bring this economy up. Absolutely. And I think that's why, you know, a lot of conservatives are very happy to have Judge Kavanaugh be Justice Kavanaugh, because a lot of the rollback of economic, environmental, consumer protection, health care, civil rights, litigation, regulations can often only be rolled back through litigation with conservative judges, because as we've seen with, for example, the Affordable Care Act, the American public supports most of those protections and regulations, and so you're not going to achieve it through the political process. So they look to conservative judges who want, you know, this extremely smaller government to be in place, and will strike down those regulations. Elizabeth Weiger, appreciate you coming in. A rare opportunity here for this president, very early in his first term, to reshape the high court. We appreciate you weighing in on all of that. Meanwhile, we mentioned the president about to give a speech at that rally tonight in Topeka, Kansas, quickly after Brett Kavanaugh was sworn in as the latest Supreme Court justice. We'll get into that, plus how the fierce fight over Kavanaugh could affect Republican voters, its potential impact in terms of Republican intensity heading into the midterms. That's next.
Right, whether they're Bush Republicans or Trump Republicans, on like a court fight. And they played right into our hands in retrospect, turned this into a big issue, put it front and center going into the November election.
Over the last 3 or 4 days, and it shows that their rage-fueled resistance is starting to backfire at a level that nobody has ever seen before.
That's President Trump on Thursday during a rally in Minnesota. You can see the live picture, though, right there on the left. It looks like he's coming out a little bit early in Topeka, Kansas. And so we're going to go to him live in a moment. I want to bring in Sagar and Jetty, though, from the Daily Caller. He's their White House correspondent. Maybe you can do a little play-by-play with me now because we want to hear from the president. Real quick point from you, Sagar, in terms of what we've seen today with the confirmation of Brett Kavanaugh.
Yeah, the confirmation of Brett Kavanaugh, you know, we've seen the successful vote. There's been a rejoicing amongst the White House officials that I've spoken to today, and they expect this to have a major impact in the midterms. I expect the president to make that point here today about how Brett Kavanaugh has been treated, and he's going to make this the rallying cry for how he himself might be treated in the if the House were to flip.
Sagar, let's hear from the president if he takes a